All right, folks, we're going to get started here in a sec. Looks like the line has died down. Can you hear me in the back? All right, we got thumbs up. Good. We're going to have to be real close to the mic. Some of you in the far reaches of the... this is an auditorium. It's not really a room. We got curtains. Whatever this is, we're going to try and talk loud enough so that you can hear us. For those of you who can't quite see in the back, there's going to be a QR code available. We have a couple of QR codes that are kind of strewn across. Very safe for those of you who haven't heard this yet. There's nothing that could go wrong with putting QR codes at a HackerCon, but if you need the slides, we have those available for folks in the back that can't see. All right, well, let's get started. So up next, we've got Felipe Espósito and Lucas Kiofi. I actually didn't ask how, I'm sorry, I didn't ask how your last name. We did good, we did it, all right, cool. They're two security researchers with close to 2 decades of experience in security, and in this talk, they're going to explore privilege escalation mechanisms within Oracle Cloud. The title of their talk is The Oracle Awakens, Demystifying Privilege Escalation in the Cloud. I love that name, by the way. Please welcome Felipe and Lucas.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming. Let's begin. So, who am I? I'm Felipe Espósito, also known as Proteus. This is my nickname. I'm being security researcher back in Brazil over 2 decades. But okay, I'm still a bit old, but nice. And I'm the head of research at Tenchi Security. And Tenchi Security is a startup focused on cloud security and third-party risk management. And basically, that's why we do research at this team. So.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Lucas. I also work at Tenchi as a security researcher, and I'm also a master's student.
So, this is our agenda for today. So, we have a motivation. So, why we do this kind of research? We do have what is privilege escalation 101, some basic stuff about this. And we also talk about how Oracle IAM works. And this is really important to understand how Oracle how privilege escalation can work in Oracle and how they do the things in how Oracle works, actually. So, and then we're going to talk about the paths to be the chosen one, or aka become administrator, and then some conclusions. We also have some how to fix this, or how to prevent privilege escalations in cloud. And one thing that I'm curious here is how many of you guys worked or had touched Oracle Cloud? Nice, nice. So, the one-on-one might be easy for you guys, but it's important to explain how things work, right? So, what about this motivation? First of all, we all know there has paths to privilege escalations in AWS, because in 2019, Richard Spencer did the research about this for Hino Labs. We know have Azure privilege escalation as well. And we know that has GCP privilege escalation techniques as well. And we were thinking, well, might be some paths to become to privilege escalation in Oracle too, but why nobody researched about this? So we decided to dip in. So there's a XKCD comics here, basically explaining how the researcher's brain works. Basically, when you get stuck with something, you go and try to research and figure out how things work. Even if a buzz comes across us in the middle of the paths, right? And well, the second motivation for this is to help our customers because we have a third-party tool, and also because it looked cool, right? Nobody did, we can do it. Let's be the first. So, what is privilege escalation? Privilege escalation is basically any act of exploiting a bug, a design flaw, or configuration or misconfiguration that enables a regular user to get more privilege than they had before. Not actually become always the time become administrator, but if you don't have a permission to get an object on an object storage, and then you figure out a way to get this object store, you escalate privileges, right? So don't always think about become administrator, because in cloud, not always possible. But if you have more privilege than before, you privilege escalated, right? So Oracle IAM 101, how it works. And So, as any cloud provider, we have our users, the people who can access the cloud control plane. In Oracle, you can group those users in a group of users. And then we have our identity domains. And identity domains is what Oracle uses for authentication and write policies and authorizations. And in Oracle, you can split your sub-environments as compartments. What in GCP words is called projects. In AWS would be a separate AWS account for this, right? And in Azure it would be different subscriptions. And all of this is inside Attendance, and Attendance is your own account on Oracle. And any of these small pieces can have a policy. And a policy is what defines the authorization in Oracle, right? So, let's do a quick one-on-one how the IAM works. The Oracle uses a syntax that's much easier to understand than AWS. It looks like a natural language approach, much similar to SQL. So the overall syntax is something like this: allow, one identity domain and a subject, two, and a verb, and this verb is an action. The resource type in a specific location in where you can put some conditions, just like SQL, right? So in general, it makes really easy for us to understand what the policy does, but it's kind of hard to parse this in computing, software programming, right? So to make things even harder to understand, you can have some advanced statements, like you can define a group, a variable, and then assign OCID, basically an ID for this variable, and then reuse this variable whenever you want in your policies, right? So for us to write a code to figure out this, it's kind of a mess. So I told you about the verbs, right? So there are actually 4 permissions level in this order. So you have the inspect, and it only allows you to get metadata from the resource that you want to inspect. The read, and the read permissions you accumulate with the inspect. So you can inspect and also can read. This would allow you to get objects and object storage and things like this. The use allows you to inspect, read, and use. So you can, if you have permissions to use an instance, you can use an instance. And the manage allows you to the same: inspect, read, use, and manage all the things that you can do on that subject, right? So they are progressive. And about this one. It's new. Well, this is a new slide. I wasn't expecting this. Actually, that was supposed to be hidden. It was supposed to be a written slide. Sorry for that. So, and how does Oracle knows which permissions an instance, for instance, can run? It has to know it. In AWS, you have the instance profiles and roles for Azure, this kind of stuff. But in Oracle, it works like dynamic groups. So you create a dynamic group, and if an instance is inside that group, instantly Oracle knows and allows the policies for that group to that instance. So we're going to talk about now the paths to become the one, or paths to escalate privilege, right? Well, we figured it out. There's actually 4 ways to privilege escalation in Oracle. 4 generic ways to privilege escalation. The first one would be exploit or use privileged resources to steal or use their credentials. That kind of the basic one. The second one was to use the privilege that you already have to grant more privilege to yourself. The third one would be grant resources or something else more privileged and then use that resource. And the fourth one, exploit unique flaws on AIM systems, but you couldn't figure it out, you couldn't find any flaws on Oracle AIM yet. first category of privilege escalating, we have three possibilities here. The first one would be legitimately access an instance with higher privileges. So you're a developer, I like, it's dark, nice. So, and you guys can see the slide better, don't you? Good. So, sorry about this. If you're a developer and you have access to an instance who has more privilege than you already have, you can enter in that instance and get privilege from them. Still instance credentials using any kind of remote code execution, or still instance credentials using server-side request forgeries. You might not realize, but we teamed all our slides with the Matrix theme. So every single technique we figured out words and phrases from the Oracle, from the Matrix, and they named the techniques about this. So the first one that we got, you got the gift, and basically is that first one that we talked about earlier. So if you're a user or a developer that has access to an instance with higher privilege than you just enter that instance and get the tokens, the credentials, and use them, right? So all the instance authentication in Oracle is using by SSH keys. So you have to have access to that SSH keys. They cannot be easily modified. So you should be careful when handling SSH keys in whatever environment you are. Okay. The second technique that we figured out is cookies need love. So if you find any application in an instance that has a remote code execution, you can remote code execution that machine, that instance, and steal the credentials or do something on Oracle with these credentials. Basically, you only have to run that command over there, like OCI something dash off, and use the instance principal. This dash off instance principal will call to the OCI that it has to use the instance, the permissions of that instance. Before we talk about SSRF vulnerabilities, we have to talk about the metadata, right? So there's actually two versions of EMDS v1 metadata, the EMDS v1, EMDS v2. The EMDS v1 doesn't have protections against server-side request forgeries, and it's enabled by default. So that's the main problem about the Oracle server-side request forgeries. They are enabled by default. And EMDS v2 is protected against some kind of request forgeries, but if you figured out a way to inject headers on those server-side request forgeries, you'd be able to bypass the EMDS v2 as well. So this is a screenshot accessing the OCI metadata, and as you can see, just the same IP address of every cloud provider. The 169.254, 169.254. The path is different from AWS and GCP as well, but this is the information that you can get. So, and by this, the third technique that we have is take a cookie. And we thought that would be the first one to figure out this technique. But SSRFs are common, right? We know about SSRFs, vulnerabilities in AWS, and this kind of stuff. So we dig a little bit more deeper, and we figured out that Orca Security did previous research about this. So they not thought about other methods of privilege escalations as we did, but they described this in a blog post. So, and basically, you use the SSRF to steal certificates that are in that instance, right? And this finishes the first generic ways to privilege escalation, then we go to the second one. So there are actually two possibilities here. The first one is to ID yourself in a group with higher privileges, if you have the permissions to do so. or create an API key for another user with higher privileges. How it works? We call this tenant nonce. So if you're a user on Oracle and you have the permissions to use groups and use users' privileges, you can modify any group, add, remove members of that group. And if you have permissions to add anyone in which group, if you find a group with more permissions than you have, you can just add yourself in that group, and then you have those privileges, right? So kinda easy. And there's 2 print screens, so showing how we did this. The other technique about this generic group is if you have the managed user permissions, you basically create API keys for other users than you. So if you figure out there is an administrator or any user with higher privilege than you can just create keys and impersonate the user. So if you use that API keys, you can use as if you were that guy, and it returns you for in plain text the API keys. And the third one would be smell good, don't they? And you can see that we can configuration a profile on OCI CLI comments using this knowing flags like -- of API key, -- profile, -- config file, and the path to config file. Basically how to configure the OCI to run with that API keys. And Lucas, my co-workers here, 5 minutes. Okay. So Lucas, my co-worker here, is going to talk about the other 2 possibilities. And then we're going to speak about a project that we have that will be available on GitHub that explains all those techniques and terraforms for you guys to practice. So.
Apertei alguma coisa. Você consegue pôr pra mim?
Hi. So, moving on, we also have 2 techniques that are related to creating privileged resources with your permissions that you can then use. So, let's go. First one, when we're talking about instances and dynamic groups, there are 2 ways that you can put an instance into a dynamic group. So the first one is an open inclusion pattern, which is like, if this instance is in this compartment, it will belong to this dynamic group. And the other one is you can add a specific instance using its ID. So there are only those 2 methods, right? So if you are in an environment where they have configured this open method, right? And if this dynamic group has some nice privileges, like higher privileges than you already have, then it is possible, if you also have the privileges to create an instance into that compartment, then that instance will automatically belong to that dynamic group, and then it will automatically have those permissions, okay? Okay. Then you can just log into the instance and run commands from there. So... Passei 2? Não, é isso mesmo. Não, tá bom, tá certo, tá certo. So, after you create the instance, you log into it, and then you just have to install the OCI CLI. It's very easy. It's just like 2 little lines over there. And then you can start running commands into OCI using that dynamic group privileges, okay? And lastly, if you have access to an instance and you have access to use dynamic groups, then you can modify an existing dynamic groups with privileges to include your instance. Okay, so like this is a different scenario. There is a dynamic group. Maybe it's like using specific IDs to check for if the instance belongs to it. then you can create an instance and then you put it into dynamic group. You inherit all those privileges and you can use them on your instance, okay? So very, very simple, but yes, it requires some privileges beforehand. So now let's talk about how can we prevent those things, right? Because as you've seen, these are mostly IAM related issues. Like there's no big 0 days here. You need previous access to some things, you need some conditions to be able to execute these attacks. And they all come from, let's say, a bad IAM configuration, right? Someone has privileges they shouldn't have, something is not that well organized. So we're gonna give you some tips on how you can better organize your OCI environment to avoid these things. So, okay, first of all, don't grant stuff to people that don't need stuff, okay? This is basic IAM hygiene, always try to keep it up. There are more best practices that Oracle published in a document, and it's mostly basic IAM everyday things. There are just a few caveats that you should be aware of. So Oracle recommends you to create separate identity domains for categories of users and for environments. So if you recall from the previous slides, your identity domain is like where the accounts are actually stored at. So they are recommending you to create different accounts for the prod environment and for the dev environment. Like people shouldn't be having access to different environments with the same account. Yes, they should have a separate identity just for that, okay? They also recommend not using the default domain admin group for basically anything, but yeah, that's kind of basic, but worth mentioning. Sorry. Okay, so there are also some more advanced IAM techniques, let's say, that you can use to improve your environment. So let's talk about conditions, okay? Because conditions allow you to introduce higher granularity to your IAM controls, okay? As you've seen, a basic policy looks like this: allow something to something in a compartment. And the problem here is, when you say manage groups, okay, that verb manage, it's very permissive, and there are only 4 verbs, right? Like inspect, read, use, and manage. If you need something in between, you're gonna have to use conditions to get that, okay? Because they're too broad. If you need something more specific, you're gonna need to use conditions. And the same goes for the resources, okay? If you're saying groups, it's all the groups. If you want a subset of the groups, you're also gonna need to use conditions, all right? So conditions come after this where in the end, and it looks like SQL. Right? So he can do that where, you know, the permission for the request is not group delete. So we're granting him manage permissions, but he can't delete the group. So you're creating a subset of the privileges that are allowed, okay? There are also many other variables you can use here, like source IP, time of day, QFA status, geolocation, resource tags. You're gonna have to dig into them to figure out what's best for you, okay? So just another example here, so policy A allows this dynamic group to manage everything in the compartment, while the second one, it only allows access to a specific bucket, and you can see that because of the target bucket name, and only for a specific action. So this is something that you should probably be using. And finally, reviewing access. Okay, reviewing access in Oracle is very hard. So that natural language approach, it comes back to bite you in the ass. It's very hard to parse. But you have three options, okay? You can either do it manually, and you get your army of interns and set them loose on your policies. You can use Oracle Access Governance, which we're going to be talking about in a little while, or you can create some sort of natural language parser based on OCI's policy language to analyze, you're going to have to parse this natural language and treat it, and there's nothing that can do it actually. It's hard to do as far as we've seen. So this is a nice future work. If anyone want to come talk about this next year, we would be very happy to see something like this. So a quick note about Oracle Access Governance, right? So it's marketed as an IAM analyzer for all things Oracle. It comes in 3 licenses, okay? So there's like a basic license, a workloads license, and a premium license. It's not that expensive. Setting up is very easy. It takes less than 5 minutes, but the results are not that great. Like, you can see, for example, the policies that affect the user. So yeah, that helps. But you can see exactly like, okay, but which resources does this user have access to? You can see informations about like instance principals, dynamic groups. There's a lot of things that are not entirely there. Okay, so it's better than manually verifying everything by hand, but it's still not a complete solution. So yeah, you're gonna have some hard work when reviewing your IAM policies for Oracle, okay? There's also something called adaptive security in Oracle, where it's like a little risk score thingy, so you can assign scores to suspicious behavior, and if it goes above a threshold, you can like block logins and stuff. It's bundled with Oracle. Maybe try it out. Maybe it will help your scenario. Sorry?
Is that set up in the console or is that console the score setting?
Oh, this is all in the console. It's in the like authentication domain, something like that. We can talk about it later. No worries. So also be very aware of managing access to instances. As we've previously mentioned, like instances have no permissions by default. You can grant them access through dynamic groups, and afterwards the permissions of that instance can be used by anyone with access to it, and this is by design, okay? And this sucks because it's very hard to manage access to the instances, all right? Because you create the SS keys when you're creating the instance, and then afterwards, if you want to modify those keys, you have to log into the instance. Like, there is no SSH management built into the console like GCP has or HSH has. It's very like raw, you know? So you create a key and then you send it to the user, but like if he copies the key or sends it to someone else, and then everything is loose. It's hard to manage those things, all right? So be very careful of how you manage access to your instance, and if you can use like an external key vault or something, that's highly recommended in this scenario, all right? So, final conclusions. Most methods depend on IAM, so ensure you're managing your access and privileges correctly, okay? As you've seen, Oracle IAM is really hard to manage, so the best thing here is to keep it as simple as possible. Use external tools to help whenever you can, all right? Some methods are not so obvious, so be careful when messing with anything related to groups, dynamic groups, instances. Those things are tricky. And OCI's default permissions are pretty secure. Just be aware of a little few caveats, like the IAMDS v1 thing. Like, that's the opposite of AWS and GCP. And finally, we will be releasing in the sooner rather than later future a blog post about this, like with all the details, so you can go through it with more calm and patience. And we also want to release like a few reproducible labs of these things, so you can practice these techniques on your own and maybe do some more research on this and that sort of thing. Okay, fechou? Yeah, that's all. Thank you all for coming. I hope you liked it.
Thank you guys. Thank you for coming.